first code bulletin went out to, I think it was literally about 30 people 13 years later, and that goes out to about 70,000 people in the industry.
At the end of the day, unless something like this happens, those businesses are going to continue to go into liquidation.
At the heart and soul of it, you're losing places that are part of local communities. We're trying to save the high street. I think hospitality is one of the last things that's keeping a high street together. VAT in theory can be changed
easily.
Yeah, and they did it during COVID.
And it's shown when there have been previous reductions of VAT, it's had a significant impact.
One of the other problems in this country is the service industry still looks down upon. And I think it's not seen as a proper career path, and it can be an amazing career path.
Shall we kind of move on to the challenges as we see it today? And I know you've taken some very positive action in that direction. Hello, welcome to the latest episode of Series 3 of our podcasts. I'm delighted to introduce someone I've known since their youth, Adam Hyman, who is the owner of Code and also the owner of the Good Food Guide, which we'll come on to later. Adam is a leading figure in British hospitality, who I can't think of anyone who is better connected, in the industry, whether the personalities, the businesses, how brands work, and in fact, his passion for making sure hospitality is successful. And welcome, Adam. It's great to have you here. Thank you for giving up your time on this wet, difficult morning with tube strikes. Great to see you. I'd like to ask you first about how you got into hospitality, why it became a passion. And maybe I can imbue that as we go along with some tangential kind of coincidental relationships.
Yeah, definitely. Well, no, thank you very much for having me, Mark. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thanks for that very, very kind intro. I don't know, it was a funny one for me. I grew up in a family where both my parents loved restaurants and going out to eat, and was very fortunate that when we used to go on summer holidays, that all the places we went to would always be sort of not purely focused around food and drink, but would always end up going to a nice restaurant and be very much part of the experience of going on holiday. And I think the first time it sort of really struck a chord with me was when I think we went to New York as a family. I think I was sort of 15 or 16, and I think it was October half term. And I remember Dad was saying, "Oh, we've got to go to this restaurant that he was told about." I think it was actually Lawrence Isaacson who'd asked him to go and look at it for a bit of research. And I remember, obviously as quite a young kid, 16, and you're in this crazy city like New York, which, I've grown up in London, but I think we all know the buzz of New York is very different to London. I remember being in the restaurant, and for me, it wasn't so much the food, and we can sort of come on to this more, I guess, but it was that buzz and that atmosphere. And I sort of never forget it. And I think that's the first moment I caught that sort of hospitality bug of being like, this is so cool. And it always stuck with me that actually you can work in an industry like this. And it's not, I think, maybe in the generation I grew up in this country, and the sort of education I had, it was sort of, your career has to be behind it.
You had a very formal English public school education.
Yeah, and I loved my school, and I loved the whole experience. And very fortunate to go to a school like that, Charterhouse down in Surrey. But I just sort of, and we can come on to it more. There was stuff in the media this morning that's linked to the whole Adam Milburn review about youth unemployment
100%.
And sort of university education now is maybe not. Do you need to go to university? And obviously a big advocate for education, but I do think, especially in an industry like hospitality, maybe going to university for 3 years and racking up these huge amounts of student debts now is not always the right way to go for people. Anyway, I slightly digress, but yeah, I just remember that, and it always stuck with me. And my mother had always worked in hospitality. She was from a big family in Dublin, moved to New York to work in the industry, and then came to the UK. Obviously where she met my father, but she was the general manager of Reshoot on South Audley Street and Piccadilly back in the day. And then she had her own business down in Guildford. And so, yeah, I sort of grew up with one parent working in hospitality and seeing sort of hard work, but also passion behind it. And then dad, who obviously we'll come on to, it's kind of how you guys met, was involved in restaurants, but from more of a financial point of view. And then sort of, yeah, I sort of fell in love with it, but it was, as we just talked about, I went through that sort of education where you finish your A levels and there was basically no choice that you are going to university. Which I think, again, university's great, but in hindsight, it's probably the one thing in my life I maybe wish I hadn't have done.
No, one of my sons made that decision. His path has been very different, but very successful to my other two sons who just kind of followed that.
Yeah, and I feel like I still enjoyed it, and I got a degree and made good friends. But in hindsight, I probably wish I'd gone straight into this world. And then to make life even more difficult, I ended up going to do a master's in commercial property, real estate at Oxford Brookes. And that was again linked to sort of when I was growing up, I guess through dad's connections and his career path. I started doing some work experiences in the summer holidays in commercial property. And, you're at that sort of age where, let's face it, you're sort of 18, 19, 20 at university, and you start to get asked, you have to start to make these life decisions of, what am I going to do? And you're like, I guess I'll go into commercial property because it's the only thing I've done. And yeah, so did that. I remember the first day we were starting our masters at Oxford Brookes was when Lehman Brothers went bust and basically the world went bust.
I'm not sure we've ever recovered from that.
No, and it was that kind of classic thing where obviously there was a group of, I think, probably about 50 of us who, doing a master's is not a cheap thing, and sort of you view it as a way to get not a guaranteed job, but you think a year later you could
it's an investment.
Hopefully walk into a job. So doing that whole graduate rounds during that year was very difficult because all the sort of big surveying firms that usually brought on 30, 40 graduates were bringing on like 4 or 5. But I ended up doing that and then going to work for a great company called King Sturge that later got taken over by Jones Lang LaSalle. And sort of when that merger happened and I qualified as a chartered surveyor, so 2012, I sort of made the decision that actually this industry is a great industry, property. It's a very sociable one. People love going to restaurants and having a few drinks, but it just wasn't quite right for me. And that's when I made the decision to jump ship and come into this great world of hospitality. And it was actually Jeremy King, the very famous restaurateur, who's become a sort of mentor and good friend, who basically gave me some really interesting advice. And I'd got to know him a bit by going to his restaurants. And I sort of introduced myself a couple of times. And I remember, I think I just handed in my notice at work either that day or that week. And I bumped into Jeremy in Mayfair. I think he used to park his vintage Bristol in the car park. It doesn't exist anymore, but off Burlington Gardens. And I bumped into him and he said, "How's things?" And I said, "Actually, I've just handed in my notice at my current job and I really want to come and, work in your world." And he said, "Well, come and see me for a coffee." And it was him who said, "Look, you've either got 2 routes here. You either need to decide, do you want to work in restaurants? So whether it's front of house, chef, whatever, or with restaurants." And I was sort of mid to late 20s and, I was earning an okay salary in my old job. And I made the decision, actually, I want to work with restaurants. And that's sort of where Code started. And there was no big business plan. Jeremy was very kind and said, "Look, I'm about to open this big restaurant called Brasserie Zedel, just off Piccadilly." And it was quite different to the other restaurants that he'd done, especially most recently with the Wolseley and the Delaunay. And he said, "This restaurant's really targeting a slightly different crowd. I want a younger crowd coming in. It's a bit more of a touristy location." And it was when Twitter was quite big. So social media back in the day. I don't think there was Instagram then.
No.
It was 2012. And he said, "Come and help me run my social media accounts for the restaurants." So he sort of gave me my first job in this industry doing social media. I think he took quite a punt because I didn't I couldn't say I was a social media expert. But I knew what was happening in the industry, and I loved it, and I was very passionate about it. So he sort of taught me a good lesson. If you're passionate about something, you can make something work. And then off the back of doing that so basically 2013, I started Code, and I started it by sending out a newsletter that was very much targeted for the industry.
Describe what the genesis of Code was. What gave the idea? Because it's quite unique at the time.
It was, so sort of, it was that thing of, and again, it was chatting to Jeremy and a few people, and he was like, look, you've got this real passion for the industry, which is great. So you've got to work out how you can use that for a job and a career. And he was saying he felt there was a bit of a gap in the market for sort of a newsletter that was very much targeted for independent restaurateurs, maybe a bit more sort of mid to high end type restaurants in London. And again, this was back in the day when it was sort of emails, but there was no social media and stuff. So that was sort of, emails were how you really kept up with stuff, and obviously going online. And he was saying there wasn't really anything that he could read in sort of 2 or 3 minutes on probably his BlackBerry back in the day, that just gave him an overview of what was happening in London. And the same for his teams. He'd want his, especially senior teams, to be like, this is what's happened in London in the past week. What's open, what's closed, any gossip, where people are moving to. Just that sort of general going, all right, I've had a real quick update, and I can do it in 2 minutes. Because I think the other thing you've got to remember is people in hospitality generally aren't behind computers. They're in their restaurants on their phones.
And you did this week. It was a weekly newsletter.
I
used to look forward to it every month.
Oh, thank you. Well, we still do it, but and I'm not a journalist by any means. But I thought, okay, well, I'm going to try and do this. So the first Code bulletin went out to, I think it was literally about 30 people I think it was the 4th of February 2013, Monday the 4th of February, and it was Monday at 9:00. And we've kept going ever since. So 13 years later, and that goes out to about 70,000 people in the industry. I don't write it anymore, luckily. I've got a great person or great editor who writes it. But the idea is it still remained the same. It's meant to be a very useful resource for people in the industry that you can dip in and go.
And it binds the industry together.
Yeah, there's elements that we try and do that, but it is just meant to be a very useful resource for what's going on in London. Yeah, we will touch upon around Britain and maybe international, but the real sort of core focus is London, and it's very short and sharp, and people's attention spans, especially in this day and age, are short. So it's just it's the headlines of what's happening.
Yeah. Let's go back to kind of the roots of hospitality, because I know we want to come on to what we think are the challenges currently and how it could perhaps fix them. And you stood no chance of not being in hospitality, because whilst your mother was a hospitality professional and in terms of helping brands like Richoux develop, I have to confess my own self-interest of working with your father back in the 90s for Groupe Chez Girard, which some people may not recognize anymore, but it was the first independent restaurant group to ever get a listing on the London Stock Exchange. And so I worked very closely with Harry, Adam's father, at the time, and it was great fun. And I mean, we were just chatting before we started filming this, that even though this was a very, very precise kind of financial exercise, the heart of that business was pure hospitality. There were guys came together who had an absolute passion for food and wine and had developed wine businesses. One was extremely creative, Lawrence Isaacson, who was a very, very well-known advertising copywriter, part of the London scene. And at the time with other restaurateurs, I mean, the Corbin and Kings, the Conrads of this world, were doing new, innovative things. Hospitality, giving people great value and a great time in the restaurants was what it was all about. And so, the fact that we could do a financial exercise almost in terms of creating a business which then go on to buy businesses like Richoux and Scott's and various others, was innovative and incredibly interesting.
I think it was quite ahead of its game, wasn't it? Yeah. Both in terms of the I sort of hate the word concept, but in terms of what the actual restaurants were, I feel like they were quite ahead of their their game, weren't they?
Yeah, very, very much
Yeah.
so. Very much. They took traditional values, but
Yeah.
made them relevant for the time and accessible to
Yeah.
people. And, I was just chatting about them before the meeting. And again, even though as a public listed company, your financial results are extremely important, at the heart of it was a rota system that the owners of the business actually developed, and I was lucky to be included as part of that rota, where people would have to go to each restaurant at each sitting just to ensure quality control. And that wasn't tasting food and making sure the wine was the right temperature, is making sure the restaurant was running well,
Yeah.
and customers were being well looked after and they were having a good time. And that's what I call
But I think
the real values of hospitality.
But I think but I think, and that's still so relevant today, because I think you can see, there's that sort of ideology of a restaurant can't be run from a boardroom.
Yeah.
I think it's incredibly important. Obviously, it's run properly, and the whole sort of finance side of a restaurant is very important.
My wife's heard me say it many times. The most pejorative thing I can say about a restaurant when I walk in is it feels like it's been run by an accountant.
Yeah, you can tell straight away, right? Because you've had the heart and soul stripped out of it. And if you have a sort of menu that's been so, the margins have been pushed so much, and I think there's still a big sort of educational piece around restaurants as businesses, I think, to the general public. But obviously, it's quite a hard way to do that. And they're coming to have a good time. You can't do it then and there. But yes, the whole point of why people go out to a restaurant is to have a good time, right?
Yeah.
And you've got to take care of them, and they want to leave better than how feeling better than how they arrived. And I think that's down to the hospitality.
I think so, and I think Neville Abraham is one of the founders of Shade. He's written, a memoir, and I think he identified, this group of doyens of the hospitality world in London at that time. Something like 95% of customers said it wasn't about the food and drink. It was about having a good time when they were out. Yeah. And that's what their focus was. Yeah. I mean, you can have a bad time if the food's bad and the wine's crazy, or you feel you're being ripped off.
Yeah.
But it's about having a good time, a great experience, which I think is easy.
And still, for me, that's 100% the case still today. You can serve, the food's got to be a certain standard. But I think if there's a good plate of food and you have amazing hospitality and service, and you're with someone nice having a meal, then it's pretty hard to go sort of give them a bad time, I feel.
I think so. Right. I think we've kind of defined what we think good hospitality is. Yeah. Shall we kind of move on to the challenges as we see it today? And I know you've taken some very positive action in that direction. So do you want to kind of just talk us through what you see as the issues and potential solutions?
Yeah, I think hospitality. I mean, I think sort of without going back generations, I think there's been. Well, I think we sort of hit there's a sort of incredibly difficult time of when Brexit happened, and I don't mean so much the actual vote, but when all the sort of law started to come in. Mm-hmm. Which obviously really impacted the workforce in hospitality, because a lot of the people working in the industry in this country weren't British, which I think is a great thing, that we attract all this talent from around the world who, they bring different attitudes, different cultures. And I think, without sort of going into too much detail, I think, one of the other problems in this country is the service industry still looks down upon, and I think it's not seen as a proper career path. Yeah. And it can be an amazing career path, and that's something we must continue to sort of promote and change the mentality around that. So we had Brexit, and we lost a lot of amazing people then, and we had a real workforce issue, and then we obviously had the joys of COVID, and I think that really. I think, well, obviously, it changed the world, COVID, and has changed a lot of things. We were talking about working from home earlier, and that whole sort of shift in how people are living their lives. But, it really impacted hospitality for obvious reasons. And the sort of, I think probably 2024 was probably the first normalish year for our industry, because it was very hard for people to, there was no growth and expansion happening. People were in proper survival mode. So you had you've had 5, 6, 7 tough years for the industry. And then you had the whole cost of living and cost of doing business over the past couple of years. So not only have the costs gone up for operators, cost of energy, just cost of staffing, just everything. You've also then, it's been twinned with people have less money in their pockets, so are going out less and in theory spending less. And then, when Labour came into government, they obviously inherited a very tricky situation. And it seems like they're sort of, one of their ways of dealing with this was taxing business. We probably don't want to go into too many sort of, or in too much depth around this, but what they've really done is tax hospitality very hard. And I think probably in hindsight, my understanding was perhaps there wasn't quite enough research and understanding in government around changing the national insurance threshold from the 15 to the 5, which hit retail and hospitality incredibly hard. Because suddenly your national insurance is gone up through the roof.
Look, just to clarify, they haven't done anything specifically to hospitality, but a number of the measures they've taken
been around
have impacted hospitality a lot more than any other sectors, and we can look to council tax and rates, and we can look to employers' national insurance.
You're correct. Sorry. So it wasn't that they sat there going, let's target hospitality, but I think our business model as an industry, and again we can touch upon the sort of employing young people, that's also been really heavily impacted because of the rise in minimum wage, and sort of now in theory sort of you could employ someone who's 30 and got a lot of experience for the same price as someone who's 18 and got no experience. Obviously, who is an operator going to choose the experienced older person? So there's just been a real headwind of costs, and there's been lots of talk probably the past few years, and I think obviously it's off the back of COVID as well, when the government drops VAT for hospitality. And you could really see that this made it, it was a lifeline for a lot of businesses back then, when they dropped the VAT. So there's been a lot of sort of talk around, is there something that we can do around VAT, but as a permanent fix for the hospitality industry? And over the past few years, there's been lots of sort of people talking about it, and lots of initiatives to look at it. And I think the other thing that sort of come to the forefront a bit, which I certainly didn't really realize or understand enough of, was actually a lot of mainland Europe countries, France, Italy, Germany, their VAT for hospitality is around half of the headline.
It's a reduced rate, isn't it? It's not just that the VAT in that country is less. The hospitality has a discount on
it's normally around half of the headline.
Absolutely.
All the headlines are slightly different.
So we're far more than the rest of Western Europe.
Yeah, and I think the only other country is perhaps Denmark that's the same as us. So I think, and it is partly why when we all go on holiday and we go to a lovely restaurant in Italy and Spain, it is more affordable. And it's partly because of this VAT. It's not the only reason, but it definitely helps. So, and sort of over the past few years, there's been this sort of move towards, well, right, there's lots of issues we can campaign for, but actually VAT is a very clear one. I think people quite like, because it's relative to each business. It's not like business rates, which is incredibly complex and quite messy, and I think clearly needs changing. But I think that's the sort of thing.
Simplifying, absolutely.
And it can take years. Whereas VAT in theory can be changed
easily.
And they did it during COVID.
And it's shown when there have been previous reductions of VAT, it's had a significant impact.
And it should boost the consumer demand. And, they have actually, they announced something in their sort of, I can't remember the correct name, the Great British Summer that they've...
Yes.
And there was sort of, there've been lots of flippant remarks around it from restaurateurs about it. So they've reduced VAT to 5% on children's menus, which, on the face of it doesn't look like much. But the really important thing for the campaign that we've just launched is that you've got Treasury and government actively looking at VAT as a lever to boost demand. And that's the really important bit.
Which is helpful. I mean, the 5% is very specifically, as
Oh,
I understand it, on children's
children's meals.
meals, which are sold as children's
Yes, so you
meals
can't.
in a
Yeah,
restaurant. So it's not takeaways and
no,
that sort
it's
of thing.
very.
It's very, very specific and
Yeah,
limited.
yeah, and I think the idea behind it, my understanding was that cost of living is coming into summer. Parents with kids during summer holidays, sort of, a reason to entice them to go out, and hopefully that in
Mm.
theory, their kids' meal will be
Yeah.
hopefully less expensive. But I think the idea behind it is encouraging that government are using that as a mechanism.
Yeah.
So there's been a group of us who sort of come together. It's being spearheaded by Tom Kerridge, the chef and restaurateur, and it's got backing from all the different trade bodies like UK Hospitality, and me as Code is also helping behind the scenes. And the idea is, so it's called That's the Problem. So a nice little play on words. And it's very much focusing on, with one very simple, clear ask of saying to government, please cut VAT from 20% to 10% for hospitality. So we launched it less than 24 hours ago. We launched it at 5 o'clock last night.
But it was in the press before, and I read it on BBC website earlier, and
so
great coverage.
So yeah, it's good. So obviously it helps having people like Tom Kerridge, who's very well recognised and respected person in the industry, and sort of a household name through his restaurants and pubs and TV programmes. So he actually did a Newsnight special last week so it's himself, Simon Rogan, Yotam Ottolenghi and Ravneet Gill. And that sort of started to get some press interest, because they were very honest on it, going, you've got 3 hospitality venues a day closing in the UK. There's 21 a week. It picks up quickly. And I think not only is that sort of, lost revenue to the government through taxation and people paying rent and business rates and everything,
potentially unemployment benefits, etc.
But also, you're at the heart and sort of it, you're losing places that are part of local communities. And we're trying to save the high street. I think hospitality is one of the last sort of things that's keeping a high street together. And if they're now closing, you're in sort of real trouble. So so there's lots of positives behind it. And yeah, so we launched it last night. So today's the 2nd of June. We launched on the 1st of June at about 5 p.m. I think just before I sat down with you this morning, I think we've reached 20,000 signatures already, which is great. We are aiming to get 1 million. So it's a big ask. Sort of the idea is, over June, we're pushing it out to the industry. Asking restaurateurs and hoteliers and owner operators to get their staff to sign up. There's 3 million staff in hospitality in the UK. So if we can get as many of those to sign it, and then get everything ready to sort of officially launch it on the 1st of July to the consumer. So we're saying to all these venues, whether you're a cafe, a pub, a restaurant, here's all the assets you can do. You can print off stuff for the table. You can put stuff on your receipts. You can put stuff on social media, with a very clear ask to your customers and it takes about 20 seconds. You have to put your name in and your email to basically like, please sign this petition to get VAT reduced. And obviously, there's a huge amount of benefits and spin-offs around it.
Yeah. Look, at the end of the day, unless something like this happens, those businesses are going to continue to go into liquidation, cease trading, empty units and whatever. And it was interesting. Was it Alan Milburn's report?
Yes.
Or another government saying, kids don't get work experience. There are no paper rounds. Well, of course there's no paper rounds, because no one buys a newspaper anymore. But we all started working in pubs, restaurants, kitchens, cafes, whatever. And those were areas where you got quite good at speaking to members of the public, and you had to force yourself to, sort of get over your shyness and deal with people. Again, another issue that people are complaining that, youngsters who came through COVID, are not great at interfacing personally with people. And it would help.
I mean, hospitality for me, obviously I'm slightly biased, but I think it was actually Graham Norton who mentioned it to Jeremy King, and Jeremy King's written about it in his memoirs, his book he did published last year, saying it should almost be our version of national service, that every young person goes and works in a pub, a restaurant, a cafe, because, as you say, you learn the most amazing life skills. You learn how to speak to people, very difficult customers, very nice people. You learn, all those sort of important skills of turning up on time.
Yeah. Teamwork.
Just the value of money. I remember when I was growing up, I think I was like 17, and I remember I really wanted a pair of these sunglasses, and my mom was like, "Great, we'll find out how much they are." Something stupid like £100, which was, even back then was a lot of money. And she was like, "Great, okay, you can come and work with me for a week in my sandwich shop in Delhi, and then you can go and buy them at the end of the week." And I remember at the end of that week being sort of given the money. And I was like, "Gosh, I don't think I want to buy those sunglasses now." I've spent all week. I want to keep my money
Learn
because
the value of a quid.
yeah. But I
Yeah.
feel like, and it's so important. And I think hospitality, with this whole issue around youth unemployment at the moment, hospitality is such a good way to help tackle that, because we want young people to come in and work. And I think hospitality, it's always been a sort of quite a transient type workforce, and it needs part-time people, it needs evening people, it needs weekend people, but again, it's been really impacted by the cost of hiring people. And I don't think anyone has any issues about, of course people have to be paid properly, but I think they've made it incredibly expensive to hire young people part-time now. And that's been another issue, that it's putting off these businesses from hiring people and taking a punt on them. But I think, again, if we're given the right economic environment to do it, the industry will invite these people with open arms. They want good, hardworking people, and I think there's sort of so much opportunity around it.
And as you say, without those venues available, there's going to be a demise socially in terms of quality. If people can't meet in the cafe or
and I think
have a pint in the pub, or a family meal, it's the quality of life is worse.
I think the quality of life is off. And I think the other thing we sort of maybe forget sometimes is, where do you go if you're celebrating something? Where do you go if you're meeting someone for a work meeting, or, a drink after dinner? Where do you go if you're catching up with a friend for a coffee? It's all hospitality. It might be a cafe, it might be a pub, might be a nightclub if you're going out with your mates for your birthday. It's all hospitality, where we normally go and celebrate and have fun. And as you say, like, if we're starting to lose all these places, actually, where do you go? And I think, there's been a lot of research around. I think people are more lonely now than ever, with sitting behind screens, scrolling, and being addicted to the internet. And I think it's a really important part of sort of the quality of life. And as we were talking about earlier, like these are sort of the heartbeats of local communities. And I think it's really important that, especially in this country, we have the most amazing pub culture. And I think that they're really integral to local communities.
So,
and we've got to make sure that they survive.
All right. Well, look, best of luck.
Thank you.
We will absolutely support you as much as we
can. We can
on,
update
on
you
this journey.
going,
and we're very, very much behind it. And we'll certainly, beat the drum as loudly as possible. And what's your impression? Hopefully we get over this, and we can move forward. Where do you think hospitality is going? What are the sort of key trends that you're seeing?
I think with our kind of glass half full, I think, the stuff that's happening in this country, obviously we're sitting in the middle of London today, and just, to maybe focus on London to start with, like, there's still a huge number of places opening. I think the industry is very resilient. I think the diversity of cuisine in this country, but especially London, is incredible. I think it's probably kind of world class. You can go and get every type of cuisine possible, and it's at a very good standard. So I think, as much as there are incredibly tough challenges, it's not the end for hospitality. It's incredibly resilient, but we need to make sure that we keep banging the drum to make sure we aren't losing all these amazing people. But I think, so there's a huge amount of diversity. I think people like that. I think going back to sort of, it's no secret that going out to eat and drink is very expensive now. And I think people are very happy to go and spend money on that. But I think it has to be a level of experience, sort of experiential. I think to sort of, maybe 10 years ago, you could have got away with having an okay meal and a plate of something and a glass of something, and you left and you were like, yeah, it's okay, but it was 40 quid a head. So you're like, okay. I think now, because that's probably 70, 80, £100 a head, it has to be either exceptional or there has to be sort of an experiential element to it. So I think we're definitely seeing more of that. I think there has been a big shift away from fine dining. Like we're definitely noticing that, especially on the Good Food Guide. And I think there's an element of, cost, going out for those meals now. And don't get me wrong, they are incredible, and the skill and talent behind those meals. But, you're talking £300-400 a head. And there aren't many people who can maybe go and afford to do that. So I think that's definitely impacted it. And I think people are they want that more sort of informal side of, you're seeing a real rise in sort of pubs with good food. Because I think people love that idea that, maybe you feel like, okay, should we go for a pint or a couple of drinks? And you go, actually, let's have some food. I feel like sometimes that mindset people have of, do I want to go to a restaurant tonight and spend £100? Whereas actually you might go to the pub, have a couple of drinks, or actually let's have some things to eat. So I think that's how people go out now. So I think that definitely more sort of informal side of it.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing that as well. There's an influx of serious money coming in to create iconic restaurants in London, and we're talking well into the millions in terms of investment. And otherwise, the trend is people looking for quality restaurants outside of central London.
Yes, the neighbourhoods.
Yeah, when you're going back to your point, people working from home and the sort of geo kind of dynamics of people having moved out, who perhaps want to go to somewhere once or twice a week rather than can we afford to go more than once a month sort of thing.
Yeah, and in theory, it's it's more affordable to set up these venues in neighbourhoods and less central locations. So it's kind of a win-win in a way. But yeah, we do a big campaign on the Good Food Guide. Actually, this campaign we inherited from Waitrose when they owned it, but it's called Good Food Guide's 100 Best Local Restaurants. And it's very much all about celebrating these amazing neighbourhood restaurants around Britain, the places that people have at the end of their road, that they very much they go once, maybe twice a week. And it's not about, fine dining, and it's about going, being part of the community, having a great plate of food and a glass of wine. And it's not going to break the bank either. And we've really seen people embrace that and I think that's how they're wanting to go out and eat and drink.
Do you want to say a few words about the Good Food Guide? It's interesting. It's been going for, I don't know, 80 years or something originally.
1951,
there we go. And you bought it from Waitrose in 21?
So we bought it from, exactly. We bought it from, end of 2021. So it was that slightly strange time where, I think the last print edition they published as Waitrose was for 2020.
Which of course was an annual publication, wasn't it?
Yeah. So historically, So Waitrose, the last print edition was 2020, but obviously that was printed in the end of 2019. So historically, always came out in October, November for the Christmas market. People are buying their guides. And so it'd been going since 1951. And it was originally started by Raymond Postgate and post World War II, and his basically aim was to improve dining out in Britain, because obviously through the war and just I think generally dining out was not great in this country. So he armed the general public saying, if you go out to eat, tell me where you're going.
This was the era of 3 breakfasts a day, if you want to eat well in Britain.
So that's how it started, basically saying, if you're going somewhere, please write in and tell me if it's good or bad. And obviously a little bit like the Michelin guides, it very much developed on the sense that, so obviously way before technology and everything, you had your print guide in your glove box in your car when you were traveling around, or on your desk at home. And I think probably up until maybe, I'm trying to think when Waitrose bought it, probably around when Waitrose bought it, I think they had it for about 8 years. So maybe 2010, 2012. That probably worked really well, but then obviously technology has taken over at such a pace. And I think, and then when we took it over, I just think sadly, and I wish there was a case that we could have still done, published one, but sadly, just doing an annual print guide just doesn't make sense at the speed at which places open and close, and the fact that no one really wants to pick up a print guide anymore, meant that we transitioned it all to online. Because the other thing was, by the time you'd have done all the inspections, written the book, published it, it would have been out of date before it even hit the shelves. So we transitioned it far more into a digital first app product. But the whole premise behind it is still very much about telling people where to go and eat around Britain for good food. So we still inspect places anonymously. We still pay for meals. So it's very much about sort of integrity and authority behind it. But we've just had to sort of bring it into the 21st century, and we've done a real shift actually more towards that affordable, informal, best local restaurants, best pubs with food, best bakeries, because that's just how we're seeing people go out.
Absolutely.
But the idea is very much keep it going, because it's 75 years since it launched.
Good. Well, it's great you're keeping tradition going.
Trying.
In every sense, the best traditions of hospitality, publications that go with it, as well as sharing, across the community what's happening. So I just want to say thank you, Adam. It's been great speaking to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I've kind of watched your progress
vicariously
through your dad.
And thank you for always supporting us. Yeah.
No, it's my pleasure, and one of my passions, as you know, as well. And we're very lucky to act for a lot of restaurateurs and chefs, and the more we can do to help on this initiative that you've got going, which I think is in massive urgent need at the moment, we'll absolutely do. So
great.
Again, thank you, Adam. Good luck.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure.